Hello. Exasperated commuters, unhealthily packed trains and companies forced out of business. Britain's worst rail strike in 20 years has meant misery for hundreds and thousands of people. And tonight we're hosting a debate on the crisis on Southern Rail.
The train fares are going up, but the service isn't getting any better. The trains are ridiculous.
I don't know who's right, who's wrong. Somebody's got to sort it out somewhere. So somebody's going to have to change and negotiate.
I try to empathise with why they're striking.
If the company gets around the table and we can hammer out a deal, then we can call off these strikes and get everyone back to work.
We will try to get you onto the train.
It's really difficult to negotiate with another party who don't understand compromise.
I don't think the Prime Minister has any idea of the level of suffering and pain that rail passengers and businesses are suffering.
There is only one body responsible for the current strike. This is a strike from the trade unions.
Let me start by introducing our panel. Mick Lynch is the Assistant General Secretary of the RMT. Mr Lynch has said he's sorry that people have had to put up with strike action, but it's for the company to get round the table and we can hammer out a deal. Well, the man who says he's more than happy to hammer out a deal with the unions is stood right next to Mick Lynch and is Charles Horton, the Chief Executive of Southern. Hugh Merriman MP is an influential member of the Transport Select Committee. And we also have Caroline Pidgeon, Chair of the London Assembly's Transport Committee. Now, without further delay, to coin a phrase, our first question is from Dominic Morgan, a healthcare consultant from Hove who commutes to Hammersmith. Dominic.
As a daily commuter from Hove to London, I'm forced to stand on packed trains when services are cancelled due to industrial action. The other day I saw an 85-year-old man sitting on the floor because he couldn't physically get to the priority seats just a few feet away because the train was so packed. Do you acknowledge that your industrial action is causing unprecedented disruption to the lives of ordinary working people like ourselves and is also causing far more safety incidents than would ever happen due to driver-operated doors? And how do you justify this?
Dominic, thank you very much. Now, this question goes to the very heart of this dispute. Southern wants to bring in something called driver-only operated trains, DOO, where the driver, rather than the conductor, opens and closes the doors. Now, it's an argument that has been destroying people's lives for the past 8 months because the company, the union and the government can't agree whether driver-only operated trains are safe. Now, Mick Lynch, you know the rail regulator has said that it is safe. So why are you striking?
Well, to answer the gentleman's question, I am sorry and I'm aware of the unprecedented disruption and I don't want that to happen. I want a settlement to this dispute based on a common sense approach from both parties, and we think that is available right now, this afternoon, if Charles wants to go outside and draft something up with me. That settlement is available immediately. What's stopping the settlement is the attitude of the company towards changing the way that the trains are operated. There are two modes of operating trains that are available to this company to run. Earlier last year, they chose to implement and then impose a change to driver-only operation. We believe that is unsafe, not about opening and closing doors. That's one element of a conductor's role. It's about an entire suite of safety critical competencies, including evacuation, emergencies, fires, collisions, all sorts of incidents that can happen on the railway, where a safety critical second person is vital to the welfare of the passengers, guaranteed to be on board.
But Mick Lynch,
that's what the dispute is about.
You've accepted that the rail regulator has said that driver-only operated trains are safe.
I've accepted that they've said they're safe,
right,
but they haven't said they are safer. They've never at any stage in this period said they are safer than running with two people on board,
right,
two safety critical people.
But there are trains that already run with just drivers. How many accidents have there been on those trains?
30% of the services in Britain run with a driver-only operation. The majority mode in Britain, the orthodox mode, is running with two people on board. The safety critical record of driver-only operation is not as good as with a second person. Trap and drag incidents on platforms are going up. We had the incident at Watford a few weeks ago where a train collided and the driver was incapacitated and trapped in the cab. They couldn't move.
Right, let's put these things to Charles Horton.
Evacuated that train, evacuated the people, took care of people that were injured and coordinated the emergency services. That's got nothing to do with doors.
Right.
That's about having a competent person on board to take care of the public in an emergency situation.
Charles Horton, are you going to remove that second person from Southern Trains?
We're not. Look, I'll come on to that in a minute, Joe, but if I can start by saying I am deeply sorry for the inconvenience being caused to customers now, and I think the union's action is grossly disproportionate, and I also think that they are causing immeasurable damage not only to passengers but also to the regional economy as well, and it is an appalling situation. Coming back to the question you've asked me, no, we are not removing a second person from the train. In fact, there will be...
Hang on a second, Mick Lynch. Let him say his piece and we'll come back to you.
There will be a second safety-trained person...
Not safety-critical.
On more trains...
Guaranteed on every train?
Oh, let him speak, for goodness' sake.
Are they guaranteed on every train?
Hang on, Mick Lynch. Let him speak.
There will be a second safety-trained person on more trains than there were at the start of this dispute.
Do you take any responsibility for this crisis, for this dispute? It cannot all be the union's fault.
We are doing our level best to get this dispute sorted, and right throughout this whole process, we have put a number of compromises on the table.
What are they?
To try and get
what are those
sorted.
compromises?
So we put an 8-point plan to the RMT, which was intended to settle the dispute. It gave guarantees around jobs, it gave guarantees around pay, it gave guarantees for the future about how we would work. But I'm afraid they were unwilling to compromise.
Right, Mick Lynch, no, hang on a second.
The essential bit is the guarantee.
Wait a minute, because the compromise that has been put to you is that the second person will be guaranteed on the trains. The second person, according to Charles Horton, unless you think he's lying, is that a second person will be guaranteed on the trains. We'll come to the safety critical point in just one moment. Do you accept that?
Charles Horton will not guarantee a second person on every train. You look into that camera, Charles, and tell the public you're going to guarantee a safety-critical person on every train.
Let him answer, then.
Look into the camera and say it.
So, Joe, what we've guaranteed is that we will roster a second safety-trained person on as many trains as had them before we started. As many trains...
won't say it.
No, hang on a second. You need me to let me finish.
Go on.
A second safety-trained person on as many trains as we had before this started. In fact, we've recruited 100 additional people to make sure that we do this. And on top of that, what we will make sure is that those second safety-trained people are better able to look after customers, because freed up from operational tasks, they are much better able to get through trains and look after customers, which is what customers say they want.
Before I go back to the panel, and certainly to Hugh Merriman and Caroline Pidgeon, let's just hear a few more personal stories from the audience. If we can go to Emma Green from Littlehampton, who has quit her job due to the strike. Emma, can you give us your story, please?
Hi, yes. I started a new job in London, commuting. I had been a commuter before, so it wasn't new to me. I'm a single mum with an 8-year-old son. And in June, when I started, literally from the first day, I experienced horrendous delays getting home. On average, 2.5 hours after I'd left the office, and then as bad as 4.5 hours. With an 8-year-old son, a 3, 4, 4.5 hour journey isn't acceptable. So by July, I had quit my job and I'd taken a job closer to home, losing myself £7,000 a year and therefore putting my family finances at risk as well. But I did that so I could see my son, because you could not get me home on time to do so.
Right.
So my question to the panel is, how many more people's lives have to be affected? How many more have to leave their jobs, lose their jobs and have their family lives significantly disrupted as a result of your services? And may I just add, these are not purely down to strikes. They were bad before the strike started.
Well, you can hear the strength of feeling.
The rights of passengers have got to be far more important than this cheap political point scoring that we've heard this evening. And I feel so frustrated as a Southern passenger myself. I know the pain, Emma, you're going through, worrying whether you're going to get there to pick up your child on time, worrying if you're even going to make the nativity play because the driver doesn't show up for the train. So I'm there living this with you every day, and thousands of passengers. And it's really affecting people on modest incomes, because if you're a higher earner, you may well be able to work flexibly from home. But actually, it's those people who've got to go in to do the shift at the hospital, to do the shift in the shop. They're the ones who are so affected by this and are powerless with this dispute going on. Now, there were issues before. Let's not beat about the bush.
And we'll come on to them.
GTR were very poor in terms of driver recruitment, and I've raised this many times with Charles, and I know that they are recruiting more. But the unions have got to get a grip on this and get round the table and come up with a deal, because we're all suffering, including your members will be suffering, with their pay packet being cut.
May I just say, this is not a choice between having a second safety-trained person on the train or not. We are saying that there will be a second safety-trained person on these trains, and we are also saying that there will be more trains with a second safety-trained person on them.
And
that is the case. That's the fact.
Before I come back...
this in public, when I sit opposite him in the negotiating room, he says that's not the case. What he says is, I cannot guarantee a person on every train, and I'm going to run the trains without that second person. Now, I'll put it to you, Charles, if you guarantee that second person on every train, we can get an agreement. Right.
Well, can you guarantee that?
Because then what we'll do, we'll define what that person does jointly, together, along with the ASLEF. We will define what that person's role is. And most employers in this country, as far as I know, when they're paying the same wage for the same job, they want that person to do as many tasks and take on as many responsibilities as possible. They refuse to do that. They will not agree to guarantee a second person. If they do that, we've got a deal.
Can you guarantee it?
So to repeat, what I've said to Mick Lynch, in private and in public, is that we are going to have a second safety-trained person on more trains than at the start of this dispute. That is the... What I will also say is that in certain predefined circumstances, if we cannot get a second safety-trained person to that train, we will let that train go, and we will get that person to that train as quickly as possible.
All right.
Because what that means is that customers suffer fewer delays, fewer cancellations, and fewer disruption to their journeys. And that's what they tell me they want.
So you're not guaranteeing it?
Hang on, are those weasel words by Charles Horton? Are those weasel words, or do you think that really constitutes a genuine offer, a change from what's been going on?
I do, but I should just say, I can understand why the audience is so confused, because you sound like you're getting two conflicting points here. What we've come to, and I had a lot of sympathy with the unions. I had a huge amount of sympathy with the unions and this issue, because I wanted a second member on the trains. But if it's safe for a train to dispatch without that second member on board, then I didn't want my hourly train on Southern to be cancelled. And that's what this really comes down to. So what Southern have said is that in exceptional circumstances, they would want that train to roll. My point to the unions was, you should be able to sit down and draw out an agreement on what those exceptional circumstances are, but they're refusing to do so. And that's what I find so frustrating. The exceptional circumstances should be where if the second member of staff is stuck further down in Dorking and the train has to go and then pick him up, then it continues to roll. That's all, though. And when it comes down to it, if Southern are putting more second members of staff on board, and not only that, rather than being stuck on one carriage, opening, closing doors, they can go and spend time with customers, sell tickets, reassure, look after safety, then this strikes me as better than what we've had previously.
But they're not safety critical, you know that.
Right, OK, well, at that point, let's talk to Hugh Merriman a little bit about the role of the government, or the lack of intervention by the government, as some people would put it. We asked Chris Grayling, the Transport Secretary, and the Rail Minister Paul Maynard to take part tonight, but they declined. Should they have been here? Should they have been here, Hugh Merriman, to answer the questions and the very tragic, actually, in some cases, stories of people here in the audience?
Well, I think one of the difficulties is that if you also have a member of the government here, then you'll end up with three people having quite a bit of a bun fight on it. So I stand here before you as a member of the Transport Select Committee to try and bring a little bit of balance and sort of some technical ideas into this particular debate. So, of course, I can't speak for them. But when it comes down to it, we're told this issue is about safety. It's not about politics. Therefore, there has to be a technical solution for this, rather than a political intervention. It's certainly the case that the government ministers are highly focused. They work very closely with Southern to try and come up with some of these proposals. So this guarantee on jobs and indeed guarantee on pay and indeed pay rises is one such idea.
But have we been let down by the government over this issue? Shouldn't they have intervened earlier?
Well, again, you talk about intervention, but it's not the government that's refusing to drive trains which the independent safety regulator has decreed is safe.
But they could have put pressure. They could have put pressure on Southern Rail with their track record.
This isn't like one of the disputes. You look back in the 80s where you had a similar dispute in terms of time, the miners' dispute, where you were looking at jobs being lost, an industry in decline. This is an industry where passenger numbers have doubled, where pay and indeed jobs have been guaranteed for the length of this franchise. This is nothing like it. So it's hard for the government to come up with more. The question may be whether the Parliament has to give the government more powers in legislation to bring this matter to an end.
Right, Mick Lynch, are you declaring war on the government? Is this a bigger power play to try and certainly injure or bring down a Tory government?
No.
As your colleague said, well, the RMT President Sean Hoyle reportedly said any trade unionist with any sense wants to bring down this bloody working-class hating Tory government. Do you agree with him?
Sean Hoyle doesn't speak for the RMT. This is about this dispute. This dispute is about safety. Hugh wants to give us guarantees about money and jobs. We don't want those guarantees in this context. We want a settlement on this dispute. The dispute is being intervened on every day by the government because they are preventing a settlement, because they want to extend DOO all over the network and set a principle. And they run this company directly with Charles as their agent.
Can you just answer the question, though? Are you using this as a campaign to protect your jobs and protect public services? So Sean Hoyle was speaking out of turn.
He's not correct in the context of this dispute, no.
Right, so he was wrong. Do you think that stokes the fire, though, of a wider political game?
I think he's been quoted out of context.
Well, how can you be quoted out of context? How can you be quoted out of context?
Because he was speaking about another dispute, I believe, about 3 or 4 months ago. Now, this context here that we have is that Chris Grayling is happy for this dispute to carry on because he wants to smash the unions. His senior official in the DfT has gone on record in a meeting like this saying it, who used to work for Southern as a director, by the way. We could get a settlement if they would come to the table and say, we guarantee a second person on every train.
Caroline Pidgeon, you'd like to see Southern stripped of its franchise, wouldn't you?
I absolutely would, and I want to see Transport for London running the suburban metro services over the next few years and the other franchises within London, because we've seen where Transport for London run franchises in London, they have a company running it at a fixed price, they take the fares risk, but what do we get? We get fully staffed stations. Actually, isn't that what we want to see? Right. Fully staffed stations is what we want to see. But so people with disabilities can turn up and go.
Caroline, answer the question. The audience,
use the service.
The audience are heckling about the fact that there's no evidence that Transport for London would do a better job. There have been 3 mayors, and they've all been dogged by RMT strikes on the London Underground, and that continues.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've got threats of strikes and strikes happening all the time. But I really think, in terms of suburban rail service, having Transport for London and the Mayor directly running those services, able to respond to local concerns, having fully staffed stations from first to last train, that transforms the network. And I'm afraid we don't have that with some of these train operators at the moment. That's what I would like to see in London. And to say, it really would help people with mobility issues so they can turn up and use any rail service like the rest of us.
Let's hear from Tim Lawton, who has spoken about the company. You've said Southern is a shambles. Do you believe that they can resolve this dispute, or they should be stripped of their franchise?
I have no problem with them being stripped of their franchise, but the franchise was defective in the first place, frankly. Nobody comes out of this strike well. It's true. The franchise is too big to handle. It's almost a quarter of the train-travelling public in this country. I doubt whether any of the other train operating companies could handle it in its current form. It needs to be broken up. Whether GTR remain in control of part of that, I don't know. But the thing that is completely undermining any train operating country running the service at the moment is a completely unreasonable strike action. It is crazy when we have Thameslink trains running between London and Brighton, who are driver-door only operated trains and have been for some time without any safety considerations, calling at these same stations on the same lines, and yet RMT and ASF are now saying, well, it wouldn't be safe for Southern trains to do the same. It's a complete and utter nonsense, and what it comes down to is a highly political strike.
Well, Mick Lynch, what do you say to that?
Well,
it's a nonsense, and you are exploiting this situation, according to Tim Lawton and some members of the audience.
Our members who live in Horsham and Eastbourne and all the other depots are not raving militants the way that has been described. They are ordinary men and women, career railway workers, who worry about their passengers. That's why they're on strike. That's why they've been out for 28 days now, and that's why they've turned down Charles Horton's bribe. What the gentleman asked over there is why
is it a bribe?
Because they said if you be quiet and go away, we'll give you £2,000.
But that's not what he said.
Well, that's what he offered.
Right.
With his 8-point plan.
Right. Is that a bribe? Is that what you're trying to do? In the end, though, is this a wider discussion for you and the unions about protecting jobs that aren't being taken away? No, we'll go to Charles Horton and then we'll come back to you on Scott Brown.
Let me answer the point about... We made a comprehensive 8-point offer which covered guarantees on jobs, which guaranteed methods of working, which talked about the training that we would give people. Part of it was an offer to help people...
we asked for. We didn't ask for those.
If I may. To help people through the transition, we did say you can have a payment of £2,000 to help you with this transition.
Do you think you owe an apology to certainly the audience here and all the users of these routes?
I do apologise, but Charles has got to apologise as well.
He has apologised at the beginning.
I do apologise for the disruption that's been caused. If you go back to the beginning of last year, there was no dispute on Southern. Charles came forward with a plan to remove guards. We told him before he did that, if you do that, there's going to be trouble. Aslef told him the same thing. He chose to go forward. The DfT tried to get the Scottish Government to do the same thing.
All right.
The Scottish Transport Minister looked at it and said, I'm not going there. I don't need to replace guards. He said he's not going to make any money out of it. He could have left the guards in place, had an efficient service and run the system the way he wants to.
On the basis of Southern's performance, I've already read out some of the statistics. You and some of your Conservative colleagues, and also Caroline Lucas, the Green MP, and Peter Carr, the Labour MP, have said that Southern is a disgrace. It has an appalling record. Caroline Pidgeon is calling for the company to be stripped of its franchise. Why has the government not done something about a company whose fare money it takes and whom the taxpayer has to fund when you have to compensate commuters who don't get to work or get home on time?
So the way the franchise agreements all work is that they have a clause within there that says that if the poor performance is not down to the rail operator but down to either Network Rail or unofficial or official industrial action, then you cannot strip a franchise operator of that franchise. Now, the irony of the union's action is that we can't tell whether this poor performance is down to Southern's management yet, because it's currently still being investigated by the Department for Transport. If the unions gave away on this issue and returned back to work, we could really see whether Southern are capable of running this service or not.
All right, but
we can't right now.
Can I go to the gentleman here in the second row? Yes.
Hello there, my name's Steve Palancy and I'm from Eastbourne. I'm an ex-train driver. Up to about 6 years ago I worked for Southern, who were a very good company to work for. I've worked at different depots, I've worked DOO and non-DOO, and I can say categorically you can run a train service DOO. However, on the events that have happened to me over a period of years, the travelling public are far less safe on a DOO train than they are when there's a guard on board. Stands to reason, I've had stabbings which couldn't be investigated early enough. I've had mass gang fights, let alone inconvenience.
But what do you say, then, about the 30% of trains and services in Britain that are run on DOO?
In an ideal world, they should all have a safety-trained guard. And I think Charles is being economical with the truth, because you say you'll put a second member of staff on board, but in exceptional circumstances that may not happen. Well, I take Hugh's point that perhaps the union and Southern could decide what's exceptional and what isn't. Otherwise, it's subjective payment. But more importantly, please, at the moment, the guards have a safety trained to a very high level, which can include, for example, leaving the train to lay emergency protection, I believe. In the current climate, with the fear of terrorism, will the new OBS be trained to exactly the same safety levels that the current guards are?
Right, and the OBS being?
Onboard supervisor.
Just so that everybody is clear.
Not relevant to the role, which I've heard your spokespeople say before.
So what do you say about being able to state categorically what the exceptional circumstances
So that was
be?
part of the offer we made to the RMT, but they weren't willing to talk about it.
Right.
So I'm afraid...
Well, you're not willing...
Steve is right,
because they're
and I'm
not
afraid...
safety critical. They're not
right.
trained safety critical staff. They've got the same status on that train as a passenger because they cannot intervene with the protection of the railway. They're not allowed to go on the track. They don't have access
if I may,
to
that
the
is
signaller.
simply untrue.
Right.
The onboard supervisors are trained in all emergency and evacuation procedures on the train. The only thing they are not trained to do is to use a very old-fashioned procedure which involves going onto the track and laying detonators after walking 1.25 miles down the track, which is a procedure which is rarely used now, if ever, and actually has been superseded by trains now having a modern GSMR radio on there where the driver pushes one button and can stop all trains around and about his train. So that is the reality of the situation. And I'm sorry, when Mick keeps saying safety train, we are training our people to
safety
look after customers, to be safety trained.
Are you listening to each other? When you speak, are you listening? Are you listening to what the other person says?
We listen to each other, but we don't agree.
Or do you listen with your hands over your ears saying, I've got an entrenched position and I'm not moving? This is both of you.
Well, we can't go any further on the dilution of safety regulation on the railway.
All right,
and we're not prepared to be party to diluting safety standards on the railway. Charles is happy to do that.
How do you get round this?
I think this is the incredibly frustrating piece, because back in the summer, when I spoke to the leader of the RMT, and I said, I take my hat off to you, you've negotiated a really good deal for your members, you've got job guarantees. But it must be right that if the train can safely move in exceptional circumstances, and that can't be because there aren't enough second crew members employed, it has to be because they're stuck somewhere else, then surely we can sit down and write it. I'll come along and help you write it. So to me, we're not that far apart. Yet we've got 300,000 people unable to get to work or study each day, and it's madness.
How would you, if Transport for London were to take over the running of these suburban rail lines, how would you resolve the London Underground strike action that's happened with the RMT?
Well, clearly, you need to have good industrial relations, and they have broken down, clearly, between Southern and the unions. That's for the Mayor of London and TfL to develop good industrial relations. And clearly, at the moment, with threats of strikes on the Underground, you know, we're not in that place.
With this dispute, would you accept Mick Lynch's proposal and demand for a safety-critical person, a second person in that role on every train on Southern?
I think we've heard very clearly from Charles Horton that there will be two people on these trains. The trains that I'm on,
so you wouldn't
don't have a second person. I don't accept the union. I think, actually, we need to move forward, and that's why I think binding arbitration should be legislated for, so actually, when we get these disputes, they can be resolved
You would
quickly.
be in the same position, though, if you were in this negotiation. You accept that?
Charles, I said to you, if you give us that guarantee, you guarantee a second person on each train, we jointly define their safety-critical competencies, and you guarantee they're going to be there, we can go out the back now and write a deal.
OK,
I've given you those papers already.
Well, you can hear how much they want this to happen, and they've waited long enough. Mick Lynch and Charles Horton, if you now have the opportunity, as Mick Lynch has just said, there is a room just to the side of the stage where you could thrash this out.
So,
would you do it? Would you do it now with Hugh Merriman? Could sit there, Caroline Pidgeon could join you and adjudicate. Would you thrash out a deal? You're a lawyer by trade. Well, that'll be helpful. Well, Hugh Merriman, could it work? Seriously?
Yeah, absolutely should, because it's incredibly frustrating for you all and for me, because you hear a lot of differences, but then you think, actually, they're not that far apart. And yet the reality is when you do take people separately, then it doesn't go anywhere. So I absolutely agree that it would be fantastic if the two parties could sit down, but would also just put things behind them and just be reasonable with the approach, which means that if it is safe to have this practice, then accept it. If there is more that can be done to get the unions where they need to be or to make stations extra safe, let's accept it. It's possible.
At this point, I'd like to thank the panel and the audience, and you can continue the debate on BBC Radio London with Duncan Barks from 10 p.m. tonight, or have your say now on the BBC London Facebook page and on Twitter, Southern Strike. But from all of us here, thank you and goodbye.